Hello and welcome to today's Digital Art History Lunchtime Lecture, the Montias Database, Exploring 17th Century Dutch Domestic Interiors Digitally. I'm Samantha Deutsch, the Digital Art History Lead here at the Frick Art Library. You may have attended our Research Fellows talk by Lauren Smith last spring on her work with the data in the Montias Database. She has continued her work and I will be adding some information in the chat about that, and she'll be speaking about it later. Before turning this over to Lauren and our speakers, I wanted to give you some housekeeping details. First, we have a packed program today, and in the interest of time, we'll be adding detailed biographies and associated links in the chat for you to view at your leisure. Please use the Q&A feature for your questions, and we will have a session at the conclusion of the second talk. Also, please note that this will be recorded and available towards the end of the month on our website. So without further ado, I'm turning it over to Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Before I turn things over to our speakers, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Montias Database, which was created by John Michael Montias. In the 1970s, Montias, a professor of economics at Yale University, began his initial inquiries into art history. He ultimately developed a method that combined expansive archival work, statistics, and formal economic theory into a novel approach which led to new discoveries about notable Dutch artists, including Johannes Vermeer, who's having quite the moment today. Montias spent the 1980s and 1990s collecting and analyzing information related to 17th century inventories housed in the Staatsarchief in Amsterdam, both independently and in collaboration with what is now the Getty Research Institute. He carefully transcribed and collected information from 1,288 inventories over 51,000 objects that were housed in the archive, as well as conducted additional research on prominent artists, dealers, and collectors he encountered in the records. In consultation with Montias, the Frick Art Reference Library staff, primarily art historian Louisa Wood-Ruby, who I believe is in attendance today, made his database available to researchers in 2001. To optimize the searchability of the Montias database, in 2019, the library made CSV files of the data publicly and freely available on GitHub, an online software development platform that allows users to store and collaborate on digital projects. The original conception of the Montias database and the scholarly arguments that shaped it has been faithfully preserved by the library in these spreadsheets. The Frick Art Reference Library making this database accessible to researchers allows them to expand, revise, and update Montias's original dataset on their personal devices so that it can better respond to a broader set of questions related to the production, consumption, display, and sale of fine art and material culture in 17th century Amsterdam. Recent advancements in data science, coupled with the ubiquity of high-speed computing, enables researchers to harness complex and computationally greedy algorithms that were previously unattainable and apply them to specific art historical research questions. Our two speakers today will present how they have applied computational methods to the Montias database alongside other sources to enhance and expand our knowledge of the artistic and cultural spheres of 17th century Amsterdam. So I will now turn things over to our first speaker, Weixuan Li, a postdoctoral researcher at Leiden University Centre for the Arts and Society. Her full bio can be found in the chat. And with that, Weixuan, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, can you see my screen well, Lauren? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and thank you, Lauren, for the introduction and also for inviting me to share my dissertation research in your great audience in this webinar. And today in this talk, Leo and I are going to share with all of you how we expanded and enriched the Montias database digitally in order to understand the 17th century interiors in Amsterdam and beyond. Next slide. The Montias database has been, as you all know, has been one of the most important sources for art historians and historians to research the collection of paintings, in the ordinary Amsterdam citizens' homes. And the traditional and the most intuitive way of using this database is from this website, rooms here. And by entering the keyword in the search box and for the relevant information, basically using this website as a search engine. And in recent years, the free collection also published the Montias database in the digital form in the data repository GitHub as datasets. And these datasets opens up great ways and new ways to apply various computational tools to the Montias database. And in an earlier talk, Lauren herself has already illustrated how to create a social network using the datasets as a whole. And in this talk, Leiden and I are going to take the datasets from the Montias database further and expand and enrich it with our own research. And so in the first part of this talk, I will use the datasets to explore the 17th century domestic interiors by adding supplemental spatial information. And in the second part, Leiden is going to showcase the potential of new digital tools to help leverage the rich information in the database and link it to the archival sources and to the other databases. And together, we hope to demonstrate the use of computational means and the richness of the inventory data. And my part of the talk stems from my doctoral research within the Virtual Interiors project. And our project aims at recreating the experience of Golden Age Amsterdam. And to do so, we take advantage of the semantic web of historical knowledge, including inventories, and translate them into the multidimensional representations to create this immersive experience of a Golden Age Amsterdam, as the background shows, which is the Boekenkamer in one of the 3D reconstructions that we made within the context of this project. And my own research tries to understand the importance of urban and interior spaces in the production and consumption of art by analyzing inventories and other historical sources with computational tools. And in this talk, I will focus mainly on the consumption side of the art and try to answer the question of where and how ordinary Amsterdam citizens display paintings at home. I would do so by applying a novel digital methods to the inventories in the Montias database. And among the existing studies of this painting display in domestic interiors, Montias himself already realized the value of analyzing inventories collectively as a datasets. And in his famous book, Public and Private Spaces, Montias and Lohmann tried to analyze the distribution of paintings inside the homes and derive the general patterns of paintings display in domestic interiors. And for this purpose, Montias focused on the inventories that registered their paintings by a particular room and recorded the room names where the painting were found. And thanks to his work, we can now find the rooms or the room names easily in the Montias database, as I can see from the screenshot. And however, these room names are rather incomplete, because Montias only transcribe or cherry pick the works of art in the inventories, and therefore the locations were attached only to the rooms that with works of art present. And he did not write down all the rooms present in the houses, and also did not consider the overall house structure and the possible variations in the house sizes. As a result, Montias basically took the room by their face value or the names as mentioned by the notaries without considering the actual location of the rooms or the other available spaces that has no works of art present. And this missing information may lead to either an overgeneralization or a faulty categorization. As we can see from these 17th century drawings of the floor plans, the room behind the entrance hall, so there's the door here and then the room, the forehouse or the entrance hall, and the room behind it can be labeled and the various names such as the binnenhart or the inner hearth or the dagskamer, the day's room, or the bathroom here, or even as simple as a kamer or just simply a room. And if we categorize these rooms just by their names, as Montias did in the public and private spaces, we may come to the wrong categories that obscure the possible patterns that may emerge from this analysis. So simply relying on the room names to study the domestic spaces can be quite misleading in understanding the location within the interiors as well as the functions of the rooms. So it also overlooks the great variety of households in different social classes who may decorate their homes with paintings in a very different way. And to address this issue, the present research expands and supplements the spatial information to the inventories of ordinary Amsterdam houses in the Montias database. And to do so, I located inventory in the archives and fill in the missing spatial information, such as all the rooms present in the inventories, and also the sequence of rooms registered by notaries, which might suggest a route the notaries take or the relevant placement of rooms towards each other. And this information helped develop what I called the spatial reading of inventories, which we can derive the house typologies. And the spatial reading approach pays special attention to the rooms and locations mentioned in the inventories. And according to the sequence of room registered, it is possible to reconstruct the structure of the house. So for this research, I assembled over 200 inventories of Amsterdam houses from the Montias database and beyond, which assigned the objects to its specific rooms, and then connected to the original sources in the archive. And this sample excludes the inventories of painters and art dealers, so they should reflect the ordinary citizens' collecting pattern. And these inventories reviewed three main types of houses, depending on the size of the house. And these three house typologies will help us understand the distribution of paintings inside domestic interiors using data visualization. And before delving into the results of my painting distribution analysis, I could spare a few words explaining the data visualization and the methods I showed here. And this research used the scattered plot together with the histogram to visualize the general trend without losing the individuality of each inventory. And this analysis therefore differs from the calculation in the public and private spaces that uses only the average number of paintings to suggest a typical amount of paintings in each room. In my analysis, it considered both the number of paintings in each room as suggested in the x-axis and the total collection size as shown in the y-axis. And the cluster of points can illustrate the possible correlation between the number of paintings in each room and the size of collection in the house. And they too can highlight the contrast between what is normal, meaning there was clustered point, and what was exceptional, meaning the stragglers. And also I added a solid diagonal line, which showed as a reference to a hypothetical even distribution of paintings among all the major spaces. Suppose paintings were evenly distributed in all 7 major spaces in this particular type 2 houses. And then each room should contain around 1/7 of all the paintings in the house, around 15%, a scenario that is marked by this diagonal lines proportional to the increase in the house, the total number of paintings in the house. And the points to the lower right of this reference slide denotes a particular room contain more than a fair share of the paintings. And the further a point deviates from this reference line, the more lopsided a painting distribution was to that particular room. And in addition to this reference line, I also added 2 dashed lines that suggest the 50th and 90th percentile of the number of paintings present in that room, supported by the histogram on the top. And for instance, for this street-facing entrance hall, like we can see here, or the forehouse, and the 50% of the houses in my sample, which suggested by the first dashed line, had fewer than 7 paintings in this room, and 90% of them have fewer than 13 paintings, which means that only 10% of those strangled points have more than 13 paintings in this particular room of the house. So after knowing all the meaning of the elements, so let's go to the findings of the spatial rating of inventories in all the 3 house types. And the first type, the first type of the house is the most modest single-story deep house. And because of its limited space, the domestic life was concentrated mostly in the Binnenkammer, or the space in the second space towards the door, and which was often the best decorated and furnished room in the house. And behind this Binnenkammer often laid a kitchen, which was often unadored in contrast to the main living area before it. And in this family portrait on the right, to truthfully illustrate the austere kitchen scene behind this very well bedecked Binnenkammer. And the spatial rating of the inventories in this type 1 house shows that the most households living in this relatively small and modest house kept a collection of fewer than 25 paintings. And looking at the plot for the 4 house, which is showing here, most of the household displayed a similar number of paintings, because the difference between the 50th percentile and the 90th percentile are actually quite small. In comparison, in the Binnenkammer, behind it, in the graph shows a broader range of 50 percentile and 90 percentile, and also from the histogram, a longer tail. It suggests that it is more likely to find an excessive number of paintings in the Binnenkammer than there was in the 4 house. And this observation raises the question about Montias' own division between the public and private spaces. And because this well-decorated and well-bedecked Binnenkammer actually blurred the line between what was public and what was private. And such a division between the public and private realm, they probably did not even exist in these type 1 houses due to its very limited space. And the second house type had 1 extra floor adding to the type 1 house. And this is the most common house type in Amsterdam as well as in my sample. And the extra space introduced in this house type that added a lot of variations and in the functions and the performance of space inside the house. It can also help us to locate the specific spaces in the paintings that with the reference to the specific locations within the house. And the spatial distribution of paintings in these type 2 houses suggests that the Amsterdam citizens kept a larger painting collection than those who lived in the type 1 house. And the more interestingly is this group demonstrate the greatest variety of collection size in all the 3 groups, ranging from just a few paintings to around 130 under 1 roof. And judging by the distribution of paintings in each single room, and we see more households deviate from the strangled dots from the reference line it suggests that a small group of households in this particular house type, their Binnenkammer here, their Achterzaal, or the Voorkamer on the top. So basically the room behind the upstairs and the room at the back of the house seem to have competed for the most important space in the house. Although this Achterzaal, or the back hall, was often perceived as the most ostentatious space for receiving guests, it was located only at the rear of the house and was therefore less accessible than the Voorkamer upstairs. It can be accessed directly through a staircase from the Voorhuis, or the Binnenkammer, which was laid directly behind the Voorhuis. And for instance, in this beautiful genre piece attributed at Hendrik van der Borg at the Frick collection, portrait a household that uses their Binnenkammer behind the street-facing Voorhuis as a reception place where this drinking party next to a fireplace was hosted. And finally, it was the double houses that occupied 2 or more parcels of land and double the size of the ordinary residences that I showed before. And these houses were low in numbers, but had attracted the most scholarly attention. And most of our current impressions of the 17th century domestic interiors are in fact derived from these few but large houses, such as the presence of certain formal reception space or the division of domestic lives by the private and the public functions. But these functions were often restricted to the very few type 3 double houses and do not apply to the majority of smaller houses that I showed before. And the spatial distribution of the paintings again suggested that the household in this large house keep a larger number of paintings as expected than those in the smaller houses. However, isn't the amount of number of paintings, the amount of paintings in these larger houses are not excessively more than the ones in the smaller houses. And most of them kept a painting collection within a range between 30 and 60 paintings in their homes in the city. And they displayed paintings in a more uniformly way than the painting collection in the type 2 houses that we showed before, which has certain liberty of arranging their own space. It seems like there were social or the cultural norms that restrict the liberty of the interior decoration for the people who resided in the larger houses who might belong to the upper social class in the city of Amsterdam. And comparing these painting distribution in all these 3 house types, the general pattern of the distribution is quite clear. First, the painting collection size increased with the available spaces, as revealed in the side histogram, that the median part of this keep moving up as the available space increases. And second, most rooms had fewer than 5 to 10 paintings, which we can see from the top histogram, as well as the scatter plot, which suggests that there might be an optimal number of paintings present in most rooms. And third, the division between the public and private spaces depends mainly on the house types, and the boundaries between these public and private spaces at home is often blurred or even changing in the smaller type 1 and type 2 houses, like these 2. And the citizens in these 2 houses, these 2 house types, seem to have more liberty in decorating their homes in their own way. But people who live in type 3, the large double houses, decorated their homes often in a relatively similar manner. And in addition to the distribution of paintings by the quantity, I also looked into the distribution of monetary value inside the houses. Although we already know that even the affluent families with large painting collections owned cheap paintings, from my analysis, it's probably still quite surprising to see the scale of it. And the cheap paintings worth less than one guilder appeared in almost all rooms across all house types, even for the most imposing rooms in the type 3 houses. And no fewer than half of all the appraised paintings in the collection in all rooms are comprised of paintings worth only a few guilders, except for the only 2 rooms in the type 3 houses. And most painters who got scholarly attention and the price level can easily rank to the top 10% of the collections. And what distinguished a affluent family from the normal Amsterdam burghers seem to have been the top 1% of the painting in their collection. So the price level actually renewed both our existing knowledge, but also refreshed it with a more detailed distribution and the scale and the spread of the cheap paintings across different social classes in Amsterdam. And in addition to the quantities and the monetary value, I also tested the preferences for frames for painting in different houses. And from over 1,000 frames in my sample, it seems like the small and modest homes had a taste for the sober ebony or black frames. And whereas the large double houses really preferred the more glittering gilded frame, as we can see from both images, both paintings. And the middling sort, the type 2 houses, used both both black or sober colored ebony frames and the glittering gilded frame. And then they mixed them almost evenly in most rooms, as we can also see in the painting by Peter Hoch. And so far, this spatial rating of inventories in the Montias database and beyond provides insights into the distribution of paintings and the painting display pattern in the domestic interiors by both quantity, value, and their framing style. And all this analysis points to corroborate the decorative function of most paintings in domestic spaces. And what is still missing from this research is the actual placement of paintings in relation to other objects at home, and also the visual sources that represent or the visual construct of the interior space in the 17th century paintings of domestic interiors. And therefore, for my current postdoc research, I plan to add these visual sources to my study and employ computer vision techniques to identify and extract different elements within the paintings of domestic interiors at scale, and then compare the visual construct to the inventories of the interiors for the written sources, such as from the data from Montias database. And in this way, we can understand how the objects were placed and the relationship between the objects and also between the household object and the works of art in the domestic lives. And so with this research, I hope to create a bridge between the visual and the written sources, and in order to better understand the material culture in domestic lives and domestic interiors, and also to further expand and enrich the Montias database into this new AI-powered digital era. So thank you.
Thank you, Xuan, for that fascinating talk on your doctoral project and also your forthcoming postdoctoral project that you're about to start. As we mentioned, we're going to do questions at the end. So I'm going to now introduce our next speaker, who is Leon van Wissen, a data engineer at the University of Amsterdam, to do his part of the talk. His full bio will be in the chat. And Leon, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Thanks very much. So my talk is indeed about this textual sources brought together on the original material, the archival sources. But before I begin, everything I'm about to show was part and developed in the Golden Agent project. This project was a 6-year project funded by the Dutch government, in which we built an infrastructure to do analysis on the interactions between several branches of creative industries in Amsterdam, in particular the 17th and 18th century. We looked at how different branches interacted, for instance, in creating innovation. But we also looked at how producers and consumers of creative goods interacted. Because for producers, a lot of it is already known. We know who the painters were, or the writers. This is kept in musea and archives, but not so much was known about the consumers of this. So the persons who had the paintings in their houses, that held the books in their libraries. And this project looked into this through estate and probate inventories, because this is where you can find the objects in someone's possession. We did this to gain insight in the cultural growth in Amsterdam in this time era, because Amsterdam had a flourishing painting production and maybe was considered the center of the world in terms of book production. We did this through linking several heterogeneous data sets from different content providers, from galleries, libraries, archives, and musea, as well as universities, research data sets, through the use of linked open data. And we did this in a way that it was considered fair data that is both transparent as well as verifiable. In other words, every interpretation we added to the data was justified. And then the background for my talk now. That's the data of John Michael Montias. And yeah, there is a problem with this data. He started, as we heard, at the Getty Institute in 1986 and left there around the 90s and took his data to the Frick Library. So at this point, we have 2 copies of the same data. But we know that he expanded his data set and updated it while he was working at the Frick. And we know that others extended the data that was kept at the Getty. So at this moment, we have a synchronization problem. These 2 archives that were once the same have diverged and are out of sync. And up to today, it's a bit unclear how these 2 relate to each other. A second problem to this is that we cannot easily inspect or verify the origin of the data. We have to trust the researcher. But as we earlier heard in the talk of Weixuan, Montias was known to be a bit selective. He did not capture all the items, only the paintings. But yeah, it's not clear whether we skipped one or not. So I have a solution for this. I want to reconcile this data to their original material context, because by doing so, we'll be able to spot these mistakes or see the provenance of his data, where the data came from, what he based his findings and research on. Montias passed away in 2005, and since then, a lot of it has happened in archives, especially in the Netherlands. New digitization initiatives are launched by archives, and the Amsterdam City Archives, which is the origin of most of Montias' data, have started a mass digitization procedure. They are now scanning their material and making it digitally available. On top of this, this archive has launched several crowdsourcing initiatives in making the material they hold even more accessible. For instance, there's a crowdsourcing project on making an index to their notarial archives, also one of the sources that Montias used. And on top of this, different volunteers are training computers to recognize handwriting, with the goal of transcribing these documents by computers. In what I'm about to show, I'm combining several layers. kept in different data silos. And with data silo, I mean that data is kept in some container, or some, in this case, the archive, or data created by Montias, or a third silo, data created in the Golden Aging project. And first zooming in on the foundational layer, the ground layer, the background layer from the Amsterdam City Archives. I call that the layer 0, because this is the scanning done by the archives. This is the digital representation of the original material, of the physical copy that was analyzed by Montias and others. This is what you get if you go to the website of the archive. They give you a virtual representation of a collection by a specific notary. So you can browse through this book virtually as you would have done if you would have read it on paper. It's a nice thing. Everything is free in the Netherlands, and that is only just the case. Only recently, this was due to government decisions opened up to the public. So everyone is able to see this material, and every day more and more is scanned and made available online. Then layer 1 is the crowdsourced indexing of the notarial archives of the Amsterdam notaries. The results of this digitization procedure, the crowdsourcing, is that you can now search for particular document types, so probate inventory in this archive, see that there was a particular deed, that names are mentioned in there, location names as well, and they give you the date of the document. And here I searched on the website for Rembrandt van Rijn. You see where he appears in all these different documents. And then layer 2 is the result of this crowdsourced transcription. Volunteers are asked in a crowdsourcing project to transcribe the text. And they do this on top of the material so that the computer learns that a particular curl on the page means a letter or a word. This is then used in the Transcribus tool, an Austrian company, to train computer models that are able to analyze the entirety of this archive. The results are quite good. This is made available by the archives in the Transcribus environment, where you can search on text. Here I search for schilderij, painting, and it gives me all the finding places in this archive where this word is mentioned. Here you see an example of these words on a single page. So most likely, this is an inventory. This is all open data. And this is what we need when we want to make the Montias data more transparent, when we want to connect it to the Montias data. So now zooming on this Montias data that is kept at the Frick and at the Getty. And with this comes another problem. These data are not easily linkable to the Amsterdam City Archives data or to other content providers. Now here in the top, this is what you get when you go to the Getty right now. I completely understand that they pulled the plug on the STAR database, and I'm very interested in seeing the results of the remodeling project. But at this moment, you cannot access the data, I think. Then at the bottom, of course, the beautiful website of the Frick. And that actually is linkable because the Frick provides unique identifiers for the inventories and unique identifiers for the items in the inventories analyzed by Montias. But still, this is not yet published as linked open data, which means that it cannot be integrated in our Golden Agents research infrastructure right away. So a solution for this is that I create a user interface that brings this material together, and I quickly convert this data so that it can be integrated in the interface. So what I'm about to show in this demo, I'm going to show you the example of a single book or single collection from one notary, Jacob de Winter, that is kept in the Amsterdam City Archives. It spans from 1648 until 1665, and I used all the open data from the Amsterdam City Archives. Similar data to what is now launched on the GitHub of the Frick's Digital Art History Lab. I luckily got a dump of the STAR database by someone of the Getty, and I used the open data created in the Golden Aging project. What is important to remember if you see my demo is that it is a proof of concept. And it's meant to show the potential of this data linkage. And for sure, it contains mistakes due to the way data was given to me or due to the way I linked data. Also, it's not complete because different data sources span a different time period or different part of this, this collection of the archive. And this is a heavily updated and extended version of work I did 3 years earlier, a part of the project. So that were the data I used in this tool. But this is the method. I could only do this by implementing the standards as described in the International Image Interoperability Framework, or IIIF. And from this framework, I used the 2 specifications they have, the 2 APIs, the application programming interfaces. Namely the image API, which is a standardized way to download images, to load images into your own application. And this is luckily adopted now in digital heritage by archives. It allows you to get an entire scan or get just a fragment of a scan and use it in your application. And the second part I used is the presentation API that allows you to combine this image layer with additional metadata. Metadata on the scan, on the image itself, but also annotations on top of this data. It allows you to annotate either the entire part or just a fragment. And these annotations can have a nature of classifications, tags, comments, anything, sometimes textual, even visual. For instance, we can say that this particular fragment can be classified as the head of a person. And this is what I'll be using in the tool. So it allows you to create meaningful collections of a series of images. Underneath, this IIIF uses the web annotation framework to store these annotations. And that's a vocabulary and built in as a foundation of linked open data, also called RDF, Resource Description Framework. It's again a standardized way of interacting with data. It's an exchange format for machine readable data from the semantic web, trying to add semantics to the way you present your data. The core point of this linked open data is that everything you publish has a unique identifier, a so-called URI, or you can also call it a permalink, something unique to the thing, like a DOI or a handle. And it uses standardized vocabularies to express this metadata or other relations, such as the doubling core. So there's no misunderstanding in what we mean by specifying who a publisher is or a creator. This linked open data is then also meant to link to other sources, to other data providers. For instance, to say that a notary described in the work of Montias is exactly the same as a notary described in the notary network, which is a biographical data set on Amsterdam notaries. Or that an item in this Montias data is the same as a painting in Wikidata. Or that an item can be classified as porcelain, which is described and given a meaning in the Art and Architecture Thesaurus, the AAT, and many more. And on the right, you see the famous lot cloud. Every dot is a data set that is somehow connected. And each data set has its own expertise. Now, that was the technique, the data. If we combine this, we get this first example of a IIIF so-called manifest, such a meaningful collection. And I simply presented the images like a browsable book. So here you see me browse through the book from page 1 to the end. And on the left, you can see the metadata on this book. At the beginning, just the metadata on the book itself, on the collection of this notary. But as we proceed, you can see that I added metadata on the particular deed that we're now looking at. This is of a type probate inventory from a date. And there was a notary. And persons are mentioned, and locations. This is all given by the archive. But we can go one step further and connect the data of Michael Montias. This is another example of an inventory. And on the left, you see the information from the index of the archive, so it was layer 1. And added to that, a link I've been able to make. I compared the data at Montias by looking at the inventory number he mentioned. But then I looked for all the deeds in one single collection of this notary. I looked at the date he mentioned, and then was able to select just a few deeds that were made on this date. And then I looked at the owners he described, and was able to match it to a single inventory in the archives by doing this. You see that the owners, Nicolaas Veld, Maria Koerten, or also describes it slightly different in the Frick, correspond to the persons mentioned in the archive. And this is nice. Here we connected the data from Montias, from both the archives, back to the original context they were once drawn from. Montias had this work in his hands when he described this. And we can see the differences. So the comments at the Frick are much more elaborate than at the Getty, for instance. And if you want, you can click on this 371 and end up on the website of the Frick. Other information from layer 1, the index, is that here in blue, we can see where person names are mentioned on the page. So again, the owners is Maria Koerten and Nicolaas Veld. And if you want, you can click and end up on the website of the archives, where they are given a unique identifier. If you go back to the data at Montias, what you just saw was on the level of the inventory. But Montias also described the items in this inventory. And the nice thing is that he provided a transcription of every item. If you think of layer 2 I had, so the HDR, the computer recognized text, that gave me transcriptions of this page, the actual text that has been recognized from the handwriting. And I've been able to compare that with the transcriptions made by Montias. So what the computer recognized was number 7, a painting of the Samaritan. And Montias describes quite similar. He added a valuation, slightly different at the Frick from the Getty. But this has enough overlap for me to connect these 3 sources. And everything on this slide you see in green has been connected to an item described by Montias. Again, with a clickable identifier that makes you end up on the website of the Frick. In this slide, we see it's only done for the paintings. So Montias was only interested in this part. And it becomes even more apparent if you look at this in context, because entire list of porcelain or silverware is not analyzed. So what I'm now about to show is that I'll try to make even more data fit into this original source, this original scan by the archive. I'm going to add two more layers from the Golden Age project. A layer 4 that is an automatic textual object detection layer, and a layer 5 where I put the notes once made by Abraham Bredius also on top of this material. So a bit more data enrichment, we're going to add more connections to other data sets. In the project, we did an automatic textual object recognition. So we made a computer program that was able to take the text that was coming from this HDR, so the computer recognized handwriting, and process it and compare it in an intelligent way to a thesaurus or just a word list of possible probate inventory items. It's a simple string matching, a comparison on text. This delivered interesting results. It's not perfect, but it gives the first way to spot these items in probate inventories in the bulk of material, these 1,000 scans that are available by the archives. And with this, we can potentially do automatically what researchers like Montias did manually. And that also gives an opportunity to go beyond these paintings of Montias and look at the other types of things, up to the linen, the books, and even non-tangible financial bonds that are also described, mostly at the end of inventories. On this slide, everything, again, with a blue rectangle around it, is an object that is detected by this computer program. And in the top, we see that in het voorhuis, one of the rooms, we see twee contrafeitsels van zaliger Egbert Roelofs en de Anna Cornelis. So two portraits of two persons. And the nice thing is that even the person names are recognized, again, from the index of the archive. And because they appear in the same line, we have an implicit connection. We know these are two portraits of these particular persons. This is a page divided in rooms, not on the type of object. So other things are clothing and furniture. But on the right, you see that it also recognizes these bonds, these financial transactions. Then a final and fifth layer are the notes of Abraham Bredius. And Abraham Bredius, born in 1855, was one of the first who looked into these Dutch archives. And that was at the time where the Dutch archives were not public yet. He was the head of one of the museums in the Netherlands. And he, in a way, a predecessor of Montias in analyzing these notarial archives in Amsterdam. By adding his data that are now kept in the Netherlands Institute for Art History, we gain insight in the way he worked, but also get interesting cues on inventories that are worth looking at because a painter's name is mentioned over there, either because he's just mentioned or because the inventory is from this painter, is owned by this painter. And additionally, he gives live facts on these painters and the role they appeared in. Again, this has been a crowdsourcing project, and the Golden Ages project then integrated this data into its infrastructure. So this is how the Institute for Art History presents it on their website. It's a snippet, an excerpt from Bredius, his own comments, his annotations he made on paper that later led to the construction of his Kunstler-Inventare. And he mentions a painter, Jan Spilberger, that is mentioned in 1660 in something, a probate inventory. We've been able to connect it back to the original material. Same inventory number you see, and if we zoom in, we see that there are paintings appraised by Johannes Spilberger. Doesn't happen a lot, but I've been able to make this connection to this material and thereby both verify the way Bredius worked, similar to Montias, as well as that I've been able to enrich this data even further. And again, you can click and end up the website of the RKD. So this is nice. This is what you can do in all these new digital initiatives that are now going on at archives in the Netherlands, all around the world. What you can do when you take back the material to its original source. And it would be very interesting to extend it even further. What I showed was from one inventory book, and you'll get the link in a minute. It's online, it's public, so please browse about. But what if we extend it and then include the entire legacy of Montias or others? Would also be nice, and Weixuan already mentioned this. What if we combine this visual object detection on paintings and then are able to point to the finding place of this object textual in an inventory? Just a matter of adding data. The same technique IIIF and linked open data can be used. But for this, I'm afraid we need a new project. We need new research. So something with state-of-the-art techniques, artificial intelligence, to uncover, again, production and consumption on an even larger scale. And it's interesting material. I hope we will be able to do this. The online demo is available on my GitHub, together with all the data and the scripts. And I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leon. Weixuan, if you want to also come online, we can start answering questions. And I am going to start with, I saw Sandra put into the Q&A, if everyone can see from the Getty Provenance Index, that it is still available, searchable, and downloadable, and she has included a link. So just to start with that as it references Leon's talk. And then Weixuan, would you want to take the first question? have you read Peter Roloff's article in the Vermeer exhibition catalog, which is devoted to Vermeer's household estate inventory compiled by an agent for the notary, along with Vermeer's widow, Catharina Bollens? And does this conform with your understanding of the distribution of paintings in Amsterdam houses?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the question. I have already read that fascinating article and the whole actually amazing catalog. I think the my answer is that Vermeer is, because he's a painter, he actually falls into a second category that I didn't show here today. I actually exclude the inventories of artists and art dealers for actually everyone participated in the art trade. And in my dissertation, that I have a more detailed analysis of the artist's home and the spatial distribution of paintings inside the artist's home, that falls into a slightly different pattern than what we observe in the collectors of painters. And mainly because they usually, for most artists, including Vermeer, as we already know from this article in the catalog, that they have the painting studios inside the house, which completely, screw the distribution of paintings towards their workshop and the other exhibition space that they intend to sell the painting or display more paintings of their own and of their colleagues inside that realm. So in a sense that for the use of space, it mainly in terms of what are the more accessible and what are the more functional, they fall into the similar pattern, but the actual display of paintings actually falls completely into a different category. But thanks for the question.
And I hope Xuan and Leon, you both are reading. There's lots of wonderful congratulations and thank you mixed in with the Q&A. So just because I might have to skip those over due to time, I'm going to go now to a question for Leon. How did you find the experience of employing crowdsourcing? How did you find the data review process? And would you use crowdsourcing again?
Yeah, there was a lot of crowdsourcing in the material we used, both by the Amsterdam City Archives as well as the Dutch Institute for Art History, separate platforms as well. We did not do that directly in the Golden Ages project, but we worked with the material. And then I think it was very successful. We could not have done this without the crowd. And managing such a crowd is a skill on its own. You really have to be there for them, answer questions, and also give them more intelligent tasks than just copying over stuff. There's a big forum launched as well with this indexing project at the Amsterdam City Archives, where people have interesting findings, events happening in Amsterdam described by a notary, a new Rembrandt, or other interesting painters. So keep that in mind, but I definitely recommend that you go this way. It's impossible to train such models for recognition of handwriting or do indexing on such a large scale without the power of the crowd. So call it citizen science. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so I think we have time, unfortunately, for only one more question. So if we did not get a chance to answer your question, please reach out to our two speakers. I'm sure they would be happy to talk more about their research, especially since they are both continuing them into different facets and publications. So I think the final question I am seeing is for Xuan. Are the interiors you are studying of homes that are very involved in art, so artists or art dealers, or do they also include homes of people who aren't artists or connected closely to artists? Is there any way to know what the typical Dutch home, contained in terms of artwork?
Yeah, I hope the collections of images that I show here are mostly the people who have almost no connection to the art trade. They are sometimes the merchants or the other craftsmen that is not directly linked to the art trade. So I hope that my research today actually show what is typical of the ordinary Amsterdam citizens and how they decorate their houses. and how they use their interior spaces. But for the professionals who have certain relation to the art trade, and there we only have very few examples of such people who are on the borderline between ordinary Amsterdam citizens and or the purely consumer of art, or someone is involved in the art trade. So I think the sample size so far is still quite small. So I hope maybe in the future, when there are more data or more knowledge about the people who are actually as suppliers for the painting industry, such as frame makers, paint sellers, or other professionals, can be also revealed to us, so we can study more in depth about how they use their interior space. Thanks.
Wonderful.
I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. I think we're right at the end of our time, and let you know about our upcoming projects. So one more time, thank you to our speakers, Dr. Li and Leon van Wissen, and thank you, Lauren, for hosting the panel. Hope you all have a great day.